foreign investment and foreign expertise and private investment also, not only foreign but also national, to develop these fields. So, well, the energy reform started, and actually 3 rounds have gone already. Over 107 contracts, exploration and production contracts, have been awarded in 3 different bids. And you will see there that in the first bid, 38 contracts were awarded. We also mentioned here what is the stage of each of the contracts. In the second, these are actually some of the discoveries that have been accomplished out of this first bid. Quite big discoveries in most of the cases. In the second bid, well, this was actually the second round, I'm sorry, because there were several bids within the round. 50 contracts were awarded, both inland and shallow and deep water. 31 of those contracts are in exploration phase, 19 are in startup and transition period, mainly in inland fields. And in round 3, you have also shallow water contracts. 16 contracts have been awarded during that time. There was also the farm outs, what is actually, in my view, incorrectly called farm outs. And these were the blocks that were originally awarded to Pemex, which is, as you know, the national oil company. Pemex was given the right to round 0. This was the first round. They were awarded the opportunity to do these projects on their own or to do it with private investment through joint venture partnerships. And there has been already 3 migrations are actually called. Pemex has to apply before the Ministry of Energy authorization to migrate their entitlements to E&P contracts. Then they need to look for a partner. This needs to be done through a public bid. And they have already awarded 1 in deep water to BHP. Has been a very successful partnership, and 2 in the inland fields. So these are some of the outcomes of these different rounds, and how in most of the cases, as you have seen, and you will be given the slides, there has been important discoveries for most of the operators working in the area. You know, we have the Coche, which is Pan American, Eni, the company, Premier, and they have all announced important discoveries. The same with BHP, Murphy, and Fieldwood. In fact, in the case of Eni, they're quite advanced. They will start production this week. They have already issued bids, well, in fact, they have already awarded bids for the construction of pipelines, which has already been done. They're also put a bid for an FPSO, which is under construction, is expected to be delivered in 2 years. So there's plenty of activity in that area. So as you can see, the developments are that all these companies that you see here are now working in Mexico. They have important investments in Mexico. And of course, for the UK service suppliers, these are obviously for clients that you have already worked with in the North Sea or in other countries, and you will be also capable or able to do business with them in Mexico. I think the key here, and we will touch a little bit about it, is understanding how to do business in Mexico. What are the challenges that you will be facing, the legal challenges that you will be facing? Well, in addition to this is a very new scenario for us, because as you know, before 2013, this scenario didn't exist, it was only Pemex. Well, Pemex remains an important player in Mexico. They're a state-owned company. As I was explaining before, through the round 0, which was the first round after the energy reform, they were awarded 418 blocks. So they have 418 blocks that, as I have explained, they can develop it on their own, or they can do joint venture partnerships. The present administration has made it very clear that they do not intend to put forward any more joint ventures. They intend to do it on their own. And they have started to award contracts under what's called the Integrated Services Contract. And there are 2 types of contracts that we, as Clyde, have reviewed for clients in Mexico. The first ones are, I would call just integrated services agreements, and there's a new integrated service agreement that was announced in April. But here are mainly service contracts. Now, these are contracts where Pemex maintains ownership of the entitlement. They've been awarded entitlements over the blocks. And they will be requesting services from the contractors through service orders. The contracts are under turnkey basis. They will be providing 20% advance payment for the drilling stage only, so that the contractor can develop the field or can perform the service necessary. And they will be paid once each of the service orders are concluded. The contractor will have full responsibility for the performance of the contract, and they, of course, can subcontract as many service or suppliers that they need. And this is, again, another big opportunity for UK service companies to work in Mexico, because many of these contractors will require, since this is an integrated services contract, they have the responsibility of finding the different suppliers for the different type of activities or services that will need to be used for the development and production of this particular field. So this is a very an interesting opportunity for you, for UK companies. There is a need to have a national content, but again, this is for the contractor, not for the subcontractors. By the way, there's a need that under Mexican law, there is a requirement for service companies to meet national content. That's not right. That's not correct. There's no obligation under law. You can agree to it on the contract, but the law doesn't force you to have Mexican content, nor do you have to have Mexican employees, or nor do you have to have a Mexican director. I believe that's what happens mainly in Brazil, where there are much more restricted regulations as to operations of foreign companies. But in Mexico, and except when you're talking about shipping, you will be able to operate in Mexico as a 100% foreign entity. With your board could be foreigners, and you can have as directors of the company foreigners too. So that's not an issue. Then another thing that is interesting about this new contract is that the contract could be assigned the obligations and not only the collection rights, which is what was normally allowed under a Pemex contract. You can actually also assign the contract itself in these particular contracts, as I said, with the previous approval of Pemex. Also, the subcontractors must be approved by Pemex so that they can enter into these, provide services within the Pemex facilities. There's also the penalties are provided for in this contract. So if the contractor does not start the contract on time or does not perform the service order on time, depends on the contract, but normally they will have to pay a $25,000 per day penalty to be. Liability, again, under the contract, the contractor takes full liability for general liability. In the case of pollution, the contract does provide that Pemex will take the pollution, the loss of the well, as well as the loss of the reservoir, provided, and this is a very important point, provided that there has been no willful misconduct, bad faith, or the contractor has committed an illicit act. And that's a word that is very dangerous under Mexican law, because an illicit act is everything. If you breach a contract, it's illicit. So that's a very, very dangerous provision that has even somebody, well, especially foreign companies, need to be very careful of, because even though you may believe that you are being given a waiver of liability for pollution or for loss of wealth or loss of production, well, that would not necessarily be the case if that word is in the contract. And of course, if you are subcontracting services, this is important for you also to understand. If you're a subcontractor, to make sure that those contracts do provide you with the waiver that you're looking for. Also, handling of hazardous and special waste, this has been an issue in Mexico. I will talk about that in a minute. Limitation of liability, according to the contract, is the value of the order. However, again, it is there is a caveat that the contractor acts with negligence, willful misconduct, bad faith, or an illicit act, then there will be no limitation. Knock for knock exists in the contract. Is not a clear knock for knock that we're used to in the oil and gas offshore industry. Again, has some caveats. It's limited again to the illicit act and negligence. There's no waiver of consequential damages on a Pemex contract, so you have to be careful about that. Again, when you're being a subcontractor, to make sure that that liability is not being transferred to you. And well, Pemex also maintains the right to early terminate the contract in the event that they are required to do so based on public interest. They have the right to suspend the contract, which again is something that could be transferred to you as a subcontractor, and you have to be careful with that one. So this is the contract that has been awarded. I believe Protexa was awarded one of these contracts, and you will hear from the General Counsel about it. Also, Grupo R was provided with one contract. Marinsa was also provided with a contract. Another company in a joint venture with Bor, which is actually, Nexmar is the name of the company. They form a joint venture with Bor, and they're about to also commence their operations in Mexico. So these contracts have been awarded, and these contractors will be requiring the services of suppliers and vendors to comply with this contract. Now, in April of this year, there was also an announcement made by Pemex about a new contract that they want to do for the mature fields. And this is the new Integrated Services Agreement, if I can call it that way. Again, Pemex will maintain the ownership of the entitlement, but these contracts will actually be for a term of 15 to 25 years. The contractor, even though it will actually take over the position of the operator, even though it will not be able to consider the reserves, but it pretty much takes that position under the contract. And the contractor will be paid based on a tariff in US dollars for unit of hydrocarbons produced. Again, the contractor must provide 100% of the OPEX and the CAPEX. And the idea on this project is that Pemex will try, or I'm sure they will be able to accomplish, a new fiscal regime that allows Pemex to be profitable. And you probably know that one of the big issues about Pemex is that most of the revenues are taken by the Mexican IRS, and that is hurting them and not allowing to be profitable. And they're seeking for a change of that regime. Then what they intend to do is to have different tariffs. As you know, these are mature fields. So for what's called the Tariff 1 or T1, it's going to be approximately 50 to 20% of Tariff 2, which is the tariff that will be applied for any increase on production. So for the production that was the normal production before the contract was awarded, the contractor will get the T1 rate, which is 50 to 80% of T2. T2 is for incremental production. T3, which is Tariff 3, will be for new developments, and T4 will be for new discoveries. So there will be incremental tariffs depending on the activities being performed by the contractor. There's a possibility of also agreeing to an additional tariff for different circumstances that appear during the performance of the contract. As I have explained, this contract will be for a 15-year term, up to 25. There could be some extensions so that the contractor will be able to recover, their expenses. These contracts will have a transition period because these are mature fields that were being handled by Pemex. They will transfer them in approximately 6 months to the contractor, and then the contractor will take over the development phase of the contract. The payment terms, again, as I explained, is going to be a tariff based on production. It will be tied to the price of the Mexican mix. And what they're trying to do is to segregate the revenues of that block and put them apart from the Pemex general or overall budget, and use those revenues to pay the contractor. So the idea is that that field should be totally autonomous, so be sufficient, and should be able to produce enough funds to pay the contractor. At least that's the idea that they have. And as mentioned, also the contractor will be able to recover up to 50% of their cost on the exploratory phase of the project. Pemex will also form a committee that will be, the main purpose will be to supervise the performance of the contract. This committee will agree and approve the working program, the development program, the secondary recoveries, as well as the abandonment of the field. And this is another important thing because the contractor will be responsible for the abandonment of the field. They have to put apart a trust. They will have to create a trust where they're going to be funding this trust for the purpose of paying for the abandonment of the field when the contract terminates. The environmental liabilities or responsibilities is, well, they're actually Pemex, they are the operator. However, under the contract, they're transferred to the contractor. So the contractor takes also all the responsibility for environmental damages. So this is the new regime. Now these are the new regimes that Pemex have issued. I think that the contracts, as you have seen, are not very different to what, especially the integrated services contract, is not very different to what you were used to with Pemex. This new integrated services contract is quite new. I mean, it's something that has not been done. It would be interesting to see how many companies are actually interested. I think that it's a complicated contract because you're actually taking all the responsibilities as an operator, but you're not getting all the benefits of the operator. So that's a complicated situation, but we'll see how the market reacts. As to the other challenges that we want to talk very briefly about is the legal issues or legal challenges that you will be facing when coming into Mexico. One of the big issues, and we were talking about it just before that we started the talk. One of the important issues is the fiscal issues or tax issues. You need to keep in mind that if you operate in Mexico, the general rule is that if you operate in Mexico in excess of 183 days, you will be creating a PE in Mexico, a permanent establishment, and you will be taxable in Mexico for those operations. Now, when you're talking about activities regulated by the hydrocarbons law, that 183 days could be reduced to 30 days. So you have to be even more concerned and verify whether the activities that you perform are regulated or not by the hydrocarbons law, whether you need to form a Mexican subsidiary to work in Mexico, register a branch, so that you can expose your foreign company to taxes in Mexico. There's called the Treaty to Avoid Double Taxation between Mexico and the U.S. that could extend the 30 days to 183 days. But it's something that you definitely need to take into consideration. You will be surprised how many cases or situations we have where the company goes to work in Mexico and they realize that they have exceeded the 183 days and now they're taxable in Mexico. And the issue mainly is that you may say, well, I will never come back to Mexico. I don't have anything to worry about. Well, your contractor or your client, who will be receiving your invoices will not be able to deduct your invoices if you have exceeded 183 days and you have created a P in Mexico. So your client will be the first one saying, hey, you have to establish in Mexico because you're creating a problem for me. So it's a little bit more complex than just thinking that you can, you're coming back, it's not going to happen. The other issue that you have to consider is the labor issues in Mexico. We have a system whereby unions are granted the right to sue companies to sign collective bargaining agreements. So it's very important that before you start operations in Mexico, you sign a collective bargaining agreement with a friendly union. Okay, this is a union that will allow you to work, and assist you and help you with unfriendly unions. It's important that the union that you choose has a presence in the area, could protect you from unfriendly unions that would like to force you to hire people that you are not qualified or that do not meet the criteria or standards that you require as a company. So this is a very simple procedure, but it's important to keep in mind that you must sign a collective bargaining agreement. Also, you need to consider working visas. If you're going to have people working in Mexico, again, in excess of 183 days, they will need a working visa. And that needs to be taken. That process takes time, so it's important to consider that. You have to first apply for an entry visa. You have to get the visa in the Mexican consulate and then come back and exchange it. So it's important, again, to make sure that you do it with time, especially now because of the immigration crisis that is going on in Mexico due to the problem with Mr. Trump, where he is obviously demanding that we become their policemen or their immigration officers in Mexico. A lot of the people that were actually working on getting these visas have been sent to the border in the south of Mexico. So most of the offices in most of the areas that we used to work with are now understaffed, and it's taking longer to get the working visa. So keep that in mind if you're working in Mexico. You need time to apply for working visas, otherwise you will not be able to meet your commitments. Importation, also, please remember that you you have the opportunity of importing your equipment on a temporary basis. But again, make sure that you do it correctly. You need to be registered as an importer to be able to import goods into Mexico. There's a general importation regime, plus you have to apply for specific regimes such as textiles, steel, and sugar. So that again takes time. It is not a complicated process if you take that, if you do it correctly, but needs to be taken into consideration. No? Again, also, if you're going to be operating vessels or rigs, you need to get a water discharge permit. You need to get navigation permits. So there are permits that you will need to apply. Again, it's not complicated, it's not difficult, but you have to keep them in mind and understand that you require those permits. One of the big developments that happened just recently, just occurred, is the operation of the production in the shallow waters and deep water fields. And that's the lack of, well, you have to remember that most of the Mexican authorities are new. They were used to working with Pemex. So now they have to work with private companies. And some of them are not really clear as to the type of permits and the processes to get the permits. And what we have seen is many foreign companies actually go to the authorities, ask for the process to get their permits, and they actually get the wrong advice. And they start a process that actually harms them better instead of helping them. This was the case in the production on the authorizations for the installation of pipeline and production platforms of one of the operators in shallow waters. They did not get the proper advice. They went to the authorities, and they were convinced that what they needed to do was to allow the port to extend their area of operation all the way to their field. So they now became, all of a sudden, the field, the block, was inside the port. And that generated that they have to pay duties to the CNH, duties to the port, and it was really a huge legal mess that unfortunately we were able to advise, later on we were able to advise the operator and explain that this was wrong. We gave them all the background, on the legal background to contest that position. Unfortunately, that has been overturned, and now they're working with the correct permit. So again, be careful who you ask. It's important that you know who you ask and get the proper advice. Transfer of technology, well, that has been an issue because there's no regulations in Mexican law as to how technology should be transferred. This is a requirement for operators. This is under development. Some authorities think that the only way that you can transfer technology is to train personnel, Mexican personnel, and of course, as you know, that's not the only way. Hazardous waste and special waste. Again, this is an environmental issue which has become a major issue in Mexico because the only party that can apply for those permits are the operators. Service companies are not allowed to apply, and this is quite recent. This actually happened as a result of an amendment of the law in November of last year. Many operators that started working on the round one still believe that the service companies could apply for them, and this also disrupted their operations and created delays. So this must be done with the operator jointly, and to have a very good communications with the operator is important. Another challenge is the transportation of explosives. This is quite new. The regulation has been there forever, but it was not actually put in practice until recently. This again has created some delays because very few people really knew about it. And in fact, very few vessels are actually allowed to carry explosives in Mexico. So if your campaign, the explosives that are going to be used, consider that, make sure that your supplier understands what needs to be done and applies for it early, because there's also a very limited time to apply for the permit, and this could cause delays. Another issue is the authorizations to embark on Siemens book. In order to go to offshore, anybody that goes offshore in Mexico must have either a Siemens book or an authorization to embark. And this has been an issue because most people say, well, my people are not seafarers, how can they have a Siemens book? Well, on the Mexican law, you can actually get a Siemens book without being a seafarer. I'm a lawyer and I have a Siemens book because there are different categories. But that shows that you're actually have taken the Safety of Life at Sea course that you can go offshore. And if you, this is important again, if people don't have a Siemens book, there's a possibility of getting a permit to embark in Mexico. It's a process that is done with the Navy. It's not complicated, but again, you need to know the nitty-gritty to avoid delays, and we'll be happy to assist with that. We're very familiar with the process. Social issues have arisen recently. There have been issues. Well, inland, we were all expecting problems in Mexico when trying to access the inland fields. Incredibly, there has been only one contract that was early terminated because of social issues. The rest having been able to work without any issues. But what has recently happened in offshore is that the fishermen are starting to get together and start claiming compensations for their fishing areas being affected by exploration and production contracts. In fact, a lawsuit, a class action was actually filed. It didn't went anywhere, but still, I mean, we're seeing that this is becoming, it could become a trend. It hasn't really had any effect. But again, it's something that needs to be addressed with the assistance of the authorities, and we have also handled some of these cases for clients. Okay, and now the last challenge that we wanted to talk about is the dispute resolutions. This is something that is very important, and I would like to ask my colleague and friend Mark Walsh, please talk about it.
Thank you very much, Enrique. I suppose it's inevitable that some